There's a land just off the Atlantic, land of jungles, waterfalls, and sweet scenery, where poor people farm the lands and hunt the waters, and all live in peace and harmony. This is Guyana, beautiful Guyana. This is Guyana, beautiful Guyana. Diamond seekers go in the interior, pulling their creoles under the falls, singing sweet calypso as they heave on their way to dig up the diamond and the gold. Great kite tumbling to the river. How I love to see your foaming tide. I listen to the chirps of the cheerful kiskadee as they throw the yellow breast to the sky. Oh, Guyana, land where I was born. Oh, sweet land, shining in the sun. I could hear the monkey chatter up in a tree, and the parrots singing this melody. Oh, Guyana, beautiful Guyana. Oh, Guyana, independent and free. Oh, Guyana, where poor people farm the lands and hunt the waters, and all live in peace and harmony. This is Guyana, beautiful Guyana. This is Guyana, beautiful Guyana. Diamond seekers go in the interior, pulling their creoles under the falls, singing sweet calypso as they heave on their way to dig up the diamond and the gold. Great kite tumbling to the river. How I love to see your foaming tide. I listen to the chirps of the cheerful kiskadee as they throw the yellow breast to the sky. Oh, Guyana, land where I was born. Oh, sweet land, shining in the sun. I could hear the monkey chatter up in a tree, and the parrots singing this melody. Oh, Guyana, beautiful Guyana. Oh, Guyana, independent and free. Oh, Guyana, beautiful Guyana.
Beautiful Guyana. Oh, Guyana. Independent. Independent. Independent and free. Free from colonialism. Free from slavery. The struggle for freedom is continuous, but we are not a colony anymore. We're independent. The voice of Hilton Hemedin, very moving and very important song, important lyrics, as important as Not a Blade of Grass, celebrating our country, Guyana, the land where I was born. Even for those of us who consider ourselves citizens of the world, and we are all citizens of the world, we are first Guyanese, the land where we were born. Good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101 on a Monday night. We continue our conversation. Good evening to all of you who joined us early. We continue our conversation against the backdrop of the Venezuelan aggression against our country. But as we have said on this program, that we are not stopping the world because of Venezuela. We are including Venezuela and Venezuela's aggression in our conversation. Good evening to you, wherever you're joining us from. Wherever you're joining us from Ground Zero in Guyana. Good evening to all of you in the Essequibo, wherever you are in the Essequibo Coast, Essequibo Islands, deeper in the interior, Region 7, Region 8, Region 9. Welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who are joining us from outside of Guyana, welcome. Good evening, good night, good morning to those of you who stayed up and joining us from Europe, from the United Kingdom, from France. Welcome to Politics 101. We are here this evening monitoring what's happening. We continue to mourn the loss of 5 soldiers. We've dubbed them 5 beautiful brothers. We have dubbed them the first martyrs of this phase of Venezuela's aggression against our country. We continue to mourn their loss. We continue to be there with their families who have made the ultimate sacrifice of allowing them to serve our country in uniform, giving testimony to the belief that all of us, whatever our endeavor in life, we serve our country. Whether we are mechanics, nurses, teachers, soldiers, policemen and women, housewives, farmers, miners, we serve our country. Whether we are entrepreneurs, whether we are religious leaders, political leaders, we serve our country. And our sacrifices are equal. And there are times when some sacrifices loom larger than others. And this time, the sacrifice of our men and women who choose to put on the uniform and to defend our country as part of an army that is not as strong as other armies. And so that makes their commitment even more telling, even more important. And we've been talking about that on this program, what it means to serve in the military in a country like Guyana, in a country where history has dealt us a bad hand. Our society is divided in almost every areas. We don't always live in the same communities. For the most part, we live in separate communities. For the most part, we work in separate and different areas of the political economy. We vote separately and differently. History has dealt us that hand. We did not ask for it, but our challenge has always been to make something positive out of it. And in this time of aggression from a neighbor, when the notion of service on the battlefield and away from the battlefield becomes an important factor in our discussion, the question of who serves must loom large in our discussion. We must not shy away from it. Just as we talk about who are in the business sector, who are in the public sector, who are in the agriculture sector, we must speak about who are in the military sector, the armed forces, the military and the police. We must not shy away from it. When my brother Takuma Ogunse raised it publicly, the government charged him, shackled him like a common slave, because he raised the question about the composition of our army. He would not have been shackled for raising the question about who comprises the agriculture sector, who comprise the public sector, who comprise the mining sector, who comprise the business sector, he would not be shackled for that. He raised the question of who comprise the military sector. Some of us were timid and we didn't raise our voices loud enough when he raised that important question. But here it is staring us in our faces. When the time for who will fight on the front lines, it's not an issue that is confined to our country. History has had to deal with it. The great United States had to deal with who fought in the army. And those who fought in the army, what was their standing of some of them in the society in segregated America? Where Africans, according to the Supreme Court, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, so that while African Americans are equal under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that says that all Americans are equal before the law, the Supreme Court found that that equality was more a political equality, and that African Americans were socially unequal, and so therefore could not enjoy the same public accommodations as whites. The Supreme Court of the United States, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. The case that legalized segregation in America. The very Supreme Court in 1857 had struck another serious blow in that famous case. When it found that there is no law, no rights that the black man had, that the white man was bound to respect. And so black men fought for America in segregated battalions, but they fought for America and came back to America and lived as second-class citizens. In 1948, Harry Truman would desegregate the army in the United States of America. And that action caused a further division among white people in America. Southern Democrats left the Democratic Party. They formed the Dixiecrats and contested the 1948 election as the Dixiecrats, and later on they went Republican because Harry Truman, dared to desegregate the army. Later on, as the Vietnam War raged, Muhammad Ali and a number of black men refused to fight for America against Vietnam. An America that continued to assault their blackness. The issue of service in the army in racially segregated and racially divided society is an old issue. And we are hearing that some of our servicemen are asking in Guyana today, why should they fight for a Guyana that does not look after them as soldiers, but more importantly, does not look after them as Black men and Black women? It is a legitimate question to ask, and even if they are not asking it, loudly their families are asking, their relatives, Black people are asking that question, and they must ask that question. Even as they pledge their loyalty to Guyana, beautiful Guyana, the land where I was born, they are asking the question, what has Guyana given them in return for their loyalty? We open the newspapers and we read 6.5% increase in salary for public servants, mainly African Guyanese, mainly African Guyanese. And you hear it costs $8 billion and $9 billion. And it sounds nice. But 6.5% of $80,000, 6.5% of $100,000. Do the math. Public servants will be taking home little or nothing more than what they already are under earning. So they're living below the poverty line, and instead of giving them a livable wage, you're giving them 6.5% of an unlivable wage. And you're doing so without talking to the unions. Even as you're calling on their sons and daughters to go and fight for Guyana. You're calling on Black men and women mainly to go and fight for Guyana. And you're giving their sisters, their mothers, and their brothers in the public servants 6.5% of an unlivable wage. It is that I pass that we must live with in Guyana, that we have been living within Guyana. All governments have shoved around public servants, and they could make the excuse that they didn't have enough money. Excuse. It is spending a lot of money on other sectors. I do not grudge them. You didn't go to the sugar workers and say, I'm giving you 6.5%. You give them $250,000, $250,000, on top of their severance. I don't want to deny sugar workers that money. They should get more, but so should the public servants, the police, the army. It is the impasse that some of us have been highlighting. Good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101. We have to talk. Our condolences go out to two prominent Guyanese in the sporting arena. Joe Solomon, famous for that last ball run out in the 1960-61 tour of Australia that produced that tied test. Joe Solomon, one stump to look at, one run to go, one wicket to fall. And a moment of genius threw that wicket down. Joe Solomon of that famous group of cricketers, Solomon, Butcher, Kanhai, coming out of Port Morant, Berbice, Quarantine, and going on to the world stage and putting their genius to work for the liberation of our country and our region. Joe Solomon, dead. He died over the weekend. Perhaps one of the most under-celebrated Guyanese. Dave Martin in another beautiful calypso. Where are your heroes, Caribbean? Where are your heroes? We tend to remember them when they're dead. Joe Solomon was and is a Guyanese hero. May his soul rest in peace, and to his family and the cricket fraternity, we continue to mourn with you. And then Clyde Butts, who is more known to the younger generation, coming out of Myconi, poor black boy, rising to the top of West Indies cricket as a player, as an administrator, as a selector, and as a commentator. Another of the unsung heroes died on the streets. Like so many other Guyanese, the madness that parades our streets took his life. Young man, 66. Clyde Butts, one of the best spinners that Guyana and the Caribbean produced. I always say that if Clyde Butts had come in another era, he would have played more for the West Indies. He came at a time when in Guyana there was Roger Harper, and at a time in the West Indies when we were parading our genius to the world through fast bowling, very fast bowling, the time of the four-pronged fast bowling attack. And so there was little opportunity for the spinner. And that Butts played 7 test matches. It was a testimony to his quality. May his soul rest in peace to the people of Myconi. We offer our condolences. Good evening. And welcome to Politics 101. Brother Vibert White from the East Bank would know only too well, because that East Bank Road is like a trap. East Bank Road, the Linden Soesdijk Highway, fast becoming cemeteries. Our roads, our roadways, it's a testimony of how far we have slid from normality. So tonight, we are watching again. We got news over the weekend that the president, Irfan Ali, has been invited to meet with the president of Venezuela, Maduro, at a meeting in St. Vincent on Thursday. The meeting, from reports, is organized by Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, bringing the two leaders together to talk. I'm not an expert on international relations, and although I did study it at university, it was one of my major emphasis, but I don't pretend to be an expert in international relations, and but I do have some questions which I am sure you too have. Remember, we said on this program, and some of us have been arguing, that the objective of the Venezuelans is to use the moment to get something. All of us know that, in politics, you start with the maximum, knowing very well that at the end, you may get a minimum. And some of us have argued that that is what Venezuela is after. It is not entirely crazy to believe that Venezuela wants to walk in and take over Essequibo. They may well be thinking about doing that. Because given what's happening in the world, I mean, the Russians have walked into Ukraine. The Israelis have walked into Gaza. Well, they've always been in Gaza. And the Venezuelans may well think that they can walk into Essequibo, Guyana, and get away with it. So I'm not ruling that out, because it is a possibility. Because we're all saying that they're not going to come because of the Americans, but one can never rely on the Americans or anybody, because America looks after its own interests, first and foremost. And what America would do if Venezuela were to walk into Guyana, cross the borders and come into Essequibo and take over Essequibo, what the Americans will do and the British will do, we don't know. We don't know. We cannot be certain. If the Chinese and the Russians decide that they're going to support Venezuela walking over the border and coming into Guyana, and America decides that it will support Guyana, it becomes a war between the Chinese and the Russians on the one hand and America on the other hand. We heard the Brazilian leader, Lula, say that he will break diplomatic ties with Venezuela if they come in. You see? He's not breaking diplomatic ties now, if they come in. Remember, the Maduro government is an enemy of the United States, ideologically. Could the Americans be thinking, look, let them walk over the border and go and invade Guyana, and then that gives us an excuse for us to invade Venezuela? All scenarios are on the table. And we Guyanese cannot sit back and think that Venezuela is not going to do this because the Americans wouldn't allow it. This situation is very complex. I notice my friend Ravidev has come out with this idea of a military base, an American military base in Essequibo. And that may sound attractive because when you're in the situation that we are in, we can't defend ourselves. We barely have a standing army. Our army is ill-equipped thanks to a government which has money, but is leery about arming the army because the army is made up of mostly people who are ethnic enemies of their support base, so they never sought to arm the army. And so Venezuela coming over and getting into war, it wouldn't last an hour. The army is not prepared. We don't have a people's militia. We disbanded that because it was Burnham thing. So when you are in that kind of military vulnerability and weakness, you tend to reach for anything. And so my brother Ravi ever said, why not invite the Americans to set up an American base? Now that may, in the short term, work as a deterrence to Venezuela. But when you invite another country to set up a base in a military base in your country, you are willingly ceding some of your sovereignty. Well, some people may argue, well, you have to cede some sovereignty in order to maintain more sovereignty, because Venezuela is attacking our sovereignty. They want to take, 2/3 of our land. And some people may say, look, a military base is not much to give to keep our land. I am not saying whether Ravi is wrong or right. All I'm saying is you may be filling one hole, but in effect digging another hole for yourself. That's a possibility. The point I'm making here tonight is that do not believe that Venezuela could not and may not be thinking about invading us. There is no surety that if they walk over that border, what will happen the next day? Many of us will say, well, the Americans are going to chase them out. We do not know. We heard Exxon said that they're not worried about what Venezuela is doing. And that's a significant statement, because there must be something that Exxon knows that the rest of us don't know, that they are not worried. You see, they're players. They're state players. Important players. The Colombians, the Brazilians are important players here. CARICOM are important players. The Americans, the British, the Europeans, they're important players. These are all states. And then there are the non-state actors like Exxon and Chevron. The situation is not straightforward. And we must not fall into that frame of mind where we think it's straightforward. So, when you are in the position that Guyana is in, and I remember I argued last week that Guyana should not have been in as weak a position as we are if our government was thinking in a national way over the last 3 years. I made the argument that once we found oil and we started to pump that oil, and the amount of oil that are there, we should have anticipated that Venezuela is going to become aggressive, and we should have begun to put things in place. We didn't. Because oil for this government, the PPP government, oil for them is about keeping them in power. Keeping their power. That's the function of us as a petrol state for the PPP. It's not about development. The PPP, they're anti-development. They're not interested in developing Guyana because they have not come up with a strategy to develop Guyana. There's no military strategy to combat the Venezuelan threat. The only strategy that the PPP has is to maintain itself in power. Whether it's by using the oil money to buy vote, to coerce people, to bribe people, that is not development. And people are cheering them on, some people, you know. Oh, the PPP will be in power for the next 40 years. That is how narrow some people are. All they see is the use of oil resources for the PPP to stay in power. No, they're not talking about what Guyana will be in 40 years, what the PPP will be in 40 years. That is the narrowness of thought and praxis in our country. So we should not have been in the dire situation that we are in. Of course, we weren't going to transform the world in 3 years. We know that. But we could have at least had a better equipped army. We could have at least gone back to a people's militia. We could have at least in our education system put put in that curriculum the Venezuelan issue, as the Venezuelans have done in their education system. We could have done those things, but we haven't done them, and so here we are. So Ravi Dev is saying, well, you know, all house pon all house. Have we done that already? Let the Americans come in and put the base. I'm not saying whether he's right or wrong. I'm saying that when you become desperate, that those things come up. When you are in the situation that Guyana is in, you cannot take anything off the table. Everything has to be on the table. Everything. Including whether you talk to Maduro or not. And I'm coming to the question that I posed tonight. Why is Ali going to St. Vincent to talk to Maduro? So I'm starting off by saying that when you are in our situation, you cannot take anything off the table. You cannot say that you're not going to talk to Maduro. Everything must be on the table. So I am with the government up to this point. I noticed that Ramphel came out and support talking to Maduro. I'm not ready to go there. But I'm saying everything should be on the table, including talking to Maduro. You know, me auntie, she had a fifth standard education, as they used to say in those days. But she would say to us, she would say to me, may I send you a school, not just to read and write. May I send you a school so that nobody would make you a fool. And as I have gone through life, I have taken that wisdom with me. But that it's not just about how bright you are and how well you can read and write and all of that stuff. It's about how you put that education to work to transform situation. That's what my auntie was saying. And that's what so many aunties were saying to us when they were sending us to school. It's about the use of education and learning in a transformational way. Everything must be on the table, including talking to Maduro. But will you talk to Maduro at the first? You jump and you go and talk to Maduro. That's my question that I'm raising tonight. Ralph Gonsalves, who I love, he's one of my heroes. My academic, intellectual, and political heroes. I don't agree with his stance on Guyana. I didn't, I said so. And I hope that to meet Ralph sometime to tell him that to his face. I have not lost respect for Ralph Gonsalves. You don't lose respect for somebody when they make a mistake, if you truly had respect for them. I thought Ralph made a mistake in his stance on Guyana. And I hope sometime to run into Ralph to tell him that. Ralph is organizing this meeting. No, Ralph is a friend of Venezuela and Maduro for two reasons. Ralph supports and defends Venezuela from an anti-imperialist left-wing perspective. And all of us did. All of us who are progressive and left-wing, anti-imperialists, we supported Chavez, Maduro, Venezuela against the United States, trying to railroad them. And so Ralph supports Venezuela in that regard. Secondly, Venezuela has been good to the Eastern Caribbean countries, St. Vincent, Barbados, St. Lucia, etc., in making oil available to them at a reasonable price, the Petro-Carib program. So Ralph has a stake in this. Ralph is also a friend of Guyana. As a fellow Caribbean country, he's a Caribbeanist, and he has to be a friend of Guyana. And Ralph has become friends with the PPP. So Ralph is friends with the Venezuelans and Maduro, and he's friends with Guyana and the PPP. So Ralph finds himself in between, in a mess, in a dilemma. Logically then, Ralph would say, let's see if I can bring my two friends them together to talk. This is what is driving Ralph Gonzalez. He finds himself ideologically and politically in that situation there, where one of his friends wants to invade the country of another friend. So from Ralph Gonzalez's standpoint, I am going to try to bring them together to talk. Ralph Gonzalez is acting from his own standpoint, his own ideological and political standpoint. That's where he is starting. He's not starting from where Guyana is, because Ralph is an intelligent man. If Ralph starts from the standpoint that Guyana has done Venezuela nothing, that there's been the 1899 arbitration, and that has been binding, and Guyana's never one day sought to say to Venezuela, some of the land that the British gave up in 1899 we wanted back. Guyana never do that. Never did. If Ralph starts from where Guyana is, Ralph would not say, come to St. Vincent and let's talk. So Ralph is not starting from where Guyana is. Ralph is starting from where Ralph is. And where Ralph is coincides with where Venezuela wants to be. Note I say, Venezuela could walk over the border. That's an option they have. But Venezuela also has another scenario in mind. if we can create a situation where this thing is not seen as Venezuela bullying Guyana, but as a Venezuela-Guyana conflict. Which suggests that both Venezuela and Guyana have done some wrong. And that's where I think the Venezuelans want us to go. To say that this is a problem. No, it's not a problem. This thing was solved in 1899. It's not a problem. You know, it's like you hear the war in the Palestine. What war? One of the most mighty army in the world fighting against a group of men called Hamas who got copper rocket. A state fighting against an organization. That's not a war. That's an assault. That's an onslaught. Just as the Venezuela-Guyana thing is not a conflict. Is Venezuela bullying? But Ralph Gonzalez doesn't start there. Mia Motley doesn't start there. Because of where they find themselves. And Venezuela, they would love to get the land that they want. In the real world, that may be a long shot. But at a minimum, Venezuela wants to get a hearing, wants to be seen as rational people who have a legitimate demand and who should be heard. And perhaps coming out of it should get something of value. That's the second Venezuelan option. The first one, of course, is to walk in. The second option is to be seen as rational actors with a legitimate growth, who should be heard and who should get something. Ralph is not starting where Venezuela is. He's not starting where Guyana is. He's starting where Ralph Gonzalez is. But where Ralph Gonzalez is coincides more with what Venezuela wants than what Guyana wants. Hence the meeting in St. Vincent. Guyana doesn't want a meeting. Guyana should not want a meeting with Maduro to talk about what? If Maduro denounces his referendum, withdraws his decrees, and then said to Guyana, let's talk about normalizing relations. All you hear me tonight. If Maduro denounces his referendum, I change my mind on the referendum. If he withdraws the decree and then says to Mr. Ali, let's talk about normalizing relations again, then Guyana then should want to talk, because it's in our interest to normalize relations with Venezuela. But we cannot normalize relations with Venezuela when Venezuela just held a referendum and issues those decrees. A prerequisite to normalizing relations has to be the withdrawal of those things. I have therefore concluded, based on that careful analysis, and I may be wrong, and you all can tell me when I'm wrong, whether you all feel I'm wrong. That Guyana should have said to Ralph Gonzalez, Ralph, it's not in Guyana's interest to talk to Mr. Maduro now. What is in Guyana's interest is if CARICOM can talk to Maduro and convince Maduro you're doing nonsense. Convince Maduro that your actions against Guyana are hurting hemispheric relations. Your actions are tearing apart regional integration in the Caribbean. Your actions are a violation of international law. Your actions go against best practices in international politics. If I were president of Guyana, I would say to Ralph Gonzalez, Brother Ralph, Comrade Ralph, as he's known in St. Vincent, Comrade, it is not in Guyana's interest to talk to Venezuela. No, we have not taken talking to Venezuela off the table. We have not. We have not. But it is in our interest as Guyanese, for you, as our blood brother, and by blood brother, I'm talking here about history, you as our historical brother, to call your friend into a meeting and say to him, Maduro, we love you, but you're messing up. Not to get Maduro to talk to Ali about what? What does Guyana want now? Guyana wants Venezuela to, once and for all, withdraw its demand on our territory. That's what we want at a minimum and at a maximum. And so that meeting in Venezuela should have been a CARICOM Maduro meeting. There's not even any need for a CARICOM Guyana meeting, but as a prerequisite to the meeting, they could have called Ali and said, come and let we ganga. Come and let we talk. Let me hear what you want. They should know what Guyana want, but they could have called Ali and said, come talk to us and tell us what you want, and then go to Maduro. I preliminarily am arguing here tonight that that meeting on Thursday is premature. And I'm being very careful because I do not believe that we should take anything off the table, including a meeting between Maduro and Ali. But I think it's a case of putting the cart before the horse or the donkey. I think so. You see, brothers and sisters, I'm expressing a view. We have not discussed it in the WPA when we met our last meeting last week. This news had not come out, so we have not had a chance as a party to discuss it. So I don't know where my party stand on it. But what I'm arguing here tonight is what I will argue in my party. You see, if there was an all-party medium, an all-party forum, when Ali got that invitation, he could have called the opposition party, as in the leader of the opposition or the opposition parties, if there was an all-party forum dealing with this aggression from Venezuela, he could have gone to that all-party forum. I'm president. Ultimately, I have to make the decision. But Comrade Ralph has invited us. What do you all think? And if my party, as I said, we haven't discussed it, but if my party was part of that, we would have had our view. I would hope that it would be close to my view. And the PNC view and the AFC view and the PPP view. Because I'm not sure if Ali consulted the PPP. You see, Ali is president. But has he contacted his own party? As the PPP executive committee signed off on him going to St. Vincent? If, as Aubrey Norton has indicated that he's in favor of an all-party front, I think that's what they're calling it. If there was an all-party front, Ali could have come to that all-party front and said, let me put this matter before you all. At the end, he has the executive authority to make the decision, and he could go against what the all-party says. But at least, if there was an all-party front, he could have gone there and gotten some insights. What I'm arguing here tonight is not the WPA position. As I said, we have not had a chance. We had our executive meeting, and this invitation was made public the day after or 2 days after. So we have not had a chance as a party to discuss it. But I have been thinking about it. And as a public educator, I am letting my views known. I think it's a bad decision. Tactically, it is a bad decision. Tactically. It is not the meeting of Maduro that is bothering me. It is the timing of the meeting. You see, if you're going into a meeting like that, you have to make demands. And you have to get something before you walk into that room. Maduro's got what he wanted. Maduro wanted that meeting. Maduro's been calling to meet with Ali a long time. That Comrade Ralph has been able to organize that meeting. Maduro is getting what he wants before the meeting begins. I heard the president with some mumbo jumbo that he's not going there to discuss the border. But what else are you going there for? To discuss Star Wars? To discuss what? You're going there to discuss the border issue, whether you call it that or not. This is when you entrust government to people who don't have the capacity to think things through, or who have the capacity but don't have the political will, or both. And I think it's both. I think the PPP lacks the capacity to think through complex issues. And I think even when it has the capacity to think those issues through up to a certain point, it doesn't have the political will, because the PPP starts first and foremost by saying, how is this going to affect the PPP? Not how it is going to affect Guyana. And one affects the other. The fact that the PPP is in this notion of domination prevents it from thinking critically. It is not a party that is known for critical thought, because it has always subscribed to a kind of orthodoxy, whether it is ideological orthodoxy vis-a-vis communism, or whether it is a racial orthodoxy that arises out of the notion of domination. The PPP has not been known for critical thought. I'm telling you, if we can have a solution to Guyana's political problem tomorrow, even if my party, the WPA, is left out, if the solution means that we are out of government, I would be happy. Because it's not about my party, the WPA, it's about Guyana. Let me repeat. If we can find a viable, sensible political solution to our problems in Guyana, and it means my party is left out of whatever government that comes out of it, it wouldn't bother me. Because ultimately, it's not about my party, it's about my country. Now, of course, I would want my party to be part of the solution. But I'm saying if there is a solution, that means that my party would not be sitting in a government that comes out of that. I can live with that. I don't think the PPP thinks like that. And so when you have a government that doesn't think critically, we end up in the mess that we're in, and we make decisions like this decision. It's a premature meeting, I think. Now, can the impossible happen and something positive for Guyana come out in the meeting? All things are possible. But if you read today's Stabroek News, former President Ramutar, I think, is closer to where I am, but he says that the Venezuelans are not going to back down at that meeting. Ramutar. Clearly, Ramutar was not consulted by the PPP government. Because the logic of what Ramutar is saying is either he doesn't agree with the meeting, or he doesn't think the meeting was of any importance. Because he says in this morning's paper that he doesn't think the Venezuelans are going to back down. And that's what we Guyanese want. So Ramutar is closer to my position. It's obvious that Ramutar was not consulted, or if he was consulted, his advice was rejected. The consequence of bad governance. It is always a risk in a country like Guyana to have a government of one party, of one race, of one ideology in charge. It's always a risk. It's a risk economically, politically, and now when we are faced with the threat of a military annexation, a military incursion, and the annexation of our country. We have a one-party government, a one-race government, a one-ideology government that is so inflexible that it is taking us down deeper and deeper problems. We have always been vulnerable in Guyana. a lot of you on this program, the majority of you on the program here tonight, are supporters of the opposition, and you all would support an opposition government. An opposition government, meaning the PNC and the other parties, may be less of a risk than the PPP government, but it's still a risk. It's a risk to have a one-party government in the type of country like Guyana. It's a risk. Because when that government is incompetent and stubborn and nasty, as this government, it takes all of us down with it. These are serious times. I want you all to share this link, share this program as widely as you all can. Because I think these perspectives need to be discussed. I am not making a claim of superior wisdom. I'm not making a claim of right and wrong. I'm saying these are questions. And I hope my brother Aubrey Norton and others on the opposition side would also ponder these issues. Because the opposition, I generally agree with in the way they've handled this Venezuela issue. But they have to be very careful that they don't play electoral politics with this thing, because you see, when you're an electoral party, you first start thinking whether I will lose vote or win votes. And I think that sometimes gets in the way of wise decision making by the opposition. And the opposition has to be very careful that it does not normalize the PPP's stupidness by saying we stand with the government. I don't stand with this government. I don't. On the Venezuela issue, I don't stand with this government. I do not stand with this government. I stand for Guyana. I am prepared to stand with this government as part of an all-party front, a national front. I'm prepared to stand with this government as part of that. I'm not prepared to stand with this government that goes around the place doing stupidness. And then I must say I stand with them because we all agree that Venezuela should not invade. That don't mean we are one. Yes, we all agree that Venezuela should not invade. That does not make us one. I open the paper and I read all the nonsense there. We are one. Well, what one? If we are one, why the hell are you giving public servants 6.5% and giving others thousands and tens of thousands? What the hell, we are one? And we go along with that nonsense. I do not want to socialize you all to go along with nonsensical talk. We're not one. We should be one. We should stand as one. And there are ways in which we can stand as one. But the PPP will never open the door to it. But they want us to go along with their nonsensical talk that we stand. We do not stand as one. We stand separately on this issue of Venezuela. The only thing we agree on is that Venezuela wrong. That's the only thing we agree on. I'm not saying we must agree on everything, but we can only know what we agree on if we sit together in a room and bring our perspectives to bear, and out of that squeeze a national position. And you all should fight for nothing less than that. And you all should tell Aubrey Norton and them that they should fight for nothing less than that. Let's sit down with the professionals, the parties, and let's come to a common position. Should we go to Ralph Gonzalez's meeting or not? That is important. We are not at one on that. We're at one, I suspect, that nothing should be taken off the table, including meeting Maduro. We're at one on that. But beyond that, we are not together. We should be together. So I think the opposition itself has to pull its socks up. And the opposition has to recognize that there's sometimes you don't play politics. Because if you do that, the other side will play you. And the PPP is prepared to play us. Ultimately, whether such a meeting should occur will depend on the leaders and their advisors' specific goals, diplomatic strategies, and potential outcomes. Let me put this up for you. I'll read it. It's a little long. You all know me. I am giving me too much good work. But I think it's a very insightful comment. There are the political angles to this issue, and there are the technical diplomatic angles to this issue. And that is why we should have our technical people who are grounded in international relations and in international negotiations. We should have them at the table. We should have the Latin American specialists at the table. We should have the different shades of political perspective at the table. So that we can come up with a national position. Nothing short of a national position would help us. If as we are speaking about arming the military, even that needs discussion. Because the PPP is right. If you arm the military, you're arming black people. Let's don't twist and turn it. The PPP have been arming militias that are not black people. And even if they're black people, they're mercenaries. So it's not like the PPP not been arming anybody. They've been arming the mercenary groups. They're phantom groups. But those phantom groups are not going to go and fight Venezuela. Ultimately, the army is an arm of the state. And we cannot be in this situation with Venezuela round the corner there and some crazies over there in Suriname. And don't arm our army. But we know the sociology of arming the army. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. That is not a decision for the PPP alone to make. You got to arm the army. And yes, you're arming black people. And if you're the PPP, you got some fear where that is concerned. Well, treat black people right. Treat black people right. Treat them equitably. And you don't have to fear beefing up the army because you don't have to fear black people. So you can arm the army. You're refusing to arm the army because you fear black people. And you fear black people because you're doing wrong by black people. Do right by black people and you will have no fear about putting better equipment, military equipment in the hands of the army. One thing you're certain about is that the Guyana army is not going to overthrow no government. We're not socialized like that. Our army is not socialized like that. We're not socialized the Latin American way. So you can start there by believing that, look, these people as a first step ain't going to overthrow no government. But they're human beings. So if you do right by black people, you don't have to fear putting weapons in the arms, in the hands of the army that is predominantly black. Let's talk about this. And I'm going to say one last thing which I'm going to pursue. Indian Guyanese have a responsibility to stand up and help to defend Guyana militarily. Why? Indian Guyanese get a lot out of Guyana. They get a lot of wealth out of Guyana. Probably more wealth than other ethnic groups. And they have a responsibility. If they don't want to go and join the army, draft them by law. I don't care. I'll get into trouble because I can hear them tomorrow. Indian Guyanese get a lot out of Guyana, and they've been getting away by not putting themselves up to defend Guyana in times like these militarily. And it's unfair. It's unfair. All of us have a responsibility, all ethnic groups, to defend Guyana. And you cannot justify getting economically so much out of Guyana and finding all kinds of reasons why you can't join the army. If the PPP is true to Guyana, it will take my stupid advice, as we say. And this is a matter I'm prepared to debate anybody on. The time has come for us to stop making excuses for Indian people not joining the army. I love you all. I said, Dr. You don't smile. Sister Rhonda, I love you. I love you. I love you all. I love you all. I love you all. You cannot be making the kind of wealth out of Guyana that our Indian brothers and sisters are making, and they're dodging going and join the army. I'm prepared to debate anybody on this. I know my friends Rafi Dev and Betaram, Ramarak and them, they've been saying that Indians should go in the army should become a democratic space. So I hope they join me in this. They may not like the way, like my presentation, my logic. I've been known to say in the past that I don't mind Indians going into the army and democratizing the army, but we have to democratize the wealth too. We have to democratize the money too. And I still stand by that. So we've got to democratize the army and democratize the money. But I think the time has come for Indian people to stop making excuses and Indian leaders to stop making excuses why Indian people not joining the army. Tomorrow night, I'll be back, ready to roll. I love you all so much. Good evening to all of you, and thanks for staying with us for these important discussions. This is a moment in our history for us to talk things that we've been avoiding for a long time. See you all tomorrow.